I'm talking today to Ken Banks, who is the founder of Kiwanja.net and FrontlineSMS. Ken, how did you start FrontlineSMS?
It started with some work in South Africa in 2003-2004 when I was working on a project in Kruger National Parks. It was called Technologies for Conservation and Development. It was funded by Vodafone, and we were spending a lot of time in the field in South Africa and Mozambique. And while I was there, the parks authorities were starting to notice communities around the park who they were trying to re-engage in the conservation efforts, start to notice them getting phones. This is 2004, mind you. This is quite a long time ago. There weren't that many, but they were starting to get them. And they came to me and they said, how do we send messages to these people with phones to organise meetings, to ask opinions, to get them more involved? And I started looking for a platform that would allow them from the edge of a national park to send 30 or 40 text messages to set numbers and get replies and manage them. And I couldn't find anything. Everything that I found was web-based and needed credit cards to buy message credits. You couldn't get on the internet on the edge of Kruger National Park in 2004. You might struggle in parts today. Many people in those areas wouldn't have credit cards to use. It would just become difficult and cumbersome. So really, it just seemed surprising that there was a problem out there wasn't a solution for. And over a period of time, I thought more about that and realised that quite likely other non-profits in other places were also wanting to do something similar.
In similar circumstances.
Absolutely. So I thought, well, let's build a piece of software which doesn't need the internet and just works off the mobile phone network.
So what does FrontlineSMS do now? Because you do many more things than that simple task that you started with.
Well, fundamentally, it's still exactly the same. It's a piece of software that allows you to manage text messages to and from recipients. You can do a lot more with the messages now, so the actual functionality that's been built around the platform has grown, and we now have a module which works for community radio stations, for example. There's one for education, there's one being built for microfinance and so on. But at its core, it's still just a very, very efficient way of managing a very, very simple text message.
And it's open source software, isn't it? And describe how it works for health.
So with many hospitals with community healthcare workers who are out in rural areas at the front line of the healthcare delivery, many leave the hospital and they go out for 2 or 3 months. They don't go back. They're unable to get information on drugs or update patient records or find out information about when the mobile health unit might be around. They're unable to do very much, and a mobile phone in their hand actually gives them contact back with the central hospital. The problem with many of these hospitals are they're off the grid. They don't have mobile coverage, but don't have internet coverage. They have sporadic power, and a very, very simple platform which allows them to communicate and keep in touch with these healthcare workers is important. So what FrontlineSMS Medic did when they started their work a few years back was build a module which allowed patient records to be kept on a module attached to FrontlineSMS, and allowed the community healthcare workers to access the patient record via a text message and update a patient record via a text message. They also set a module up which allowed them to get their phones automatically topped up with credit, because the community healthcare workers couldn't always get credit in the villages. With health, a lot of the work is education based, so simply sending messages out around washing hands and how to prepare food and symptoms for diseases is crucially important, and SMS just works very well for that.
So they're very basic bread and butter services, aren't they? Then there's nothing fancy about them in that sense.
Absolutely, and the simple stuff works. I was not going out to solve a big complex problem. The problem was that people couldn't talk back and forth via SMS from a platform that worked in the places where the need was greatest, and that was really all it was set out to solve.
And who's using the software and where? What's the sort of distribution of it?
So today it's being used in about 100 countries. I think about a third are across the African continent, so Africa is still quite predominantly featured as a user base. It's being used in about 20 different sectors of development. It's being used in agriculture, health, microfinance, human rights, election monitoring, domestic violence. It's been quite staggering for me, and conservation. It's been quite staggering for me, the number of users that have been found for it, because as you said earlier, it's a very, very simple technology and only solving a very, very simple problem, but people clearly out there do have quite simple problems that we need to make sure that we solve, along with the really big complicated ones.
And you were saying earlier that the election monitoring software sort of stayed around for a long time before somebody picked it up. What made the change there?
I just think having the platform available, there was no funding at the beginning, so it was just maintained at evening and weekends. There was no pressure for me to actually really do anything with Frontline SMS at the beginning. So it was about a year and a half, 2 years before the Nigerian NGO decided to use it for that. They just read about it somewhere. I think one of the things I've done very well over the years is write and push and blog and speak and promote the platform. So they somehow heard about it, picked it up and monitored their 2007 elections, and that was the real big breakthrough point for the software.
Why is Frontline SMS different from other ICT for D projects?
I think it's different in a number of ways, not just technologically, but also in terms of the approach that's gone into building it. One of the things I was very keen to do was to build a platform which empowered the end user, and empower is a word which is used.
One of those endless blah, 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 blah
absolutely,
words.
And you kind of dig down deep and you sort of wonder whether it really is empowering. Frontline SMS, when we speak to the users, we get a real sense that it's really enabled them to increase the reach of their work and increase the efficiency of their work in ways that they could never have imagined. And they do feel genuinely empowered by that. The way the software works, by allowing them to just download it themselves and to install it themselves, to configure it themselves, to add the numbers and basically make the thing work without our intervention, I think is part of that empowerment process. Many feel hugely excited they've managed to get this thing to work and can then see the benefits. It's not about flying teams of people out to do weeks of training and consultancy. So I think that's one of the big things that makes the platform stand out, but also the fact that it is a simple technology, works off low-cost laptops, works off the basic mobile phone signal, doesn't need the internet, doesn't need any really complicated hardware, and everything you need to make it work is available locally. And I think that's absolutely crucial for this kind of platform.
Why are there so many pilots in the ICT for D world that don't seem to turn into day-to-day services?
It's a great question, and I think a lot of people ask that. One of the things that mobile technology has done for development, I think, is it's democratized it to a large extent. So, as I found when I wrote Frontline SMS in 2005, I wrote it on the kitchen table in Finland. You know, I didn't have any big swanky offices or any kind of infrastructure around me to do that. Anybody anywhere can create a tool and throw it out over the internet, which is the greatest distribution network there's ever been for anything digital, clearly. So I think what we're finding is that lots of people are trying lots of different things because the overhead and the barrier to entry is so low to do that. So we're finding the situation where we're
and that's a good thing, isn't it?
That's a good thing, absolutely. I think that the concept of letting a thousand flowers bloom is an interesting one. That if you have all this stuff going on, then ultimately you'll get something that comes out and is useful. I think that's absolutely great. It's when I think it sucks large numbers of amounts of resources and lots of money at an early stage. As a pilot, when it's not really been thought through, I think that's when it becomes a problem, because that funding could potentially be used to fund something where the early field work has been done and the project's been thought through clearly enough to not be something that, well, let's just go to Africa and try something. I think many African communities are sick and tired of being guinea pigs for pilots.
Yeah. And how many people have downloaded the software?
It's about 27,000 downloads, the last number I had from the team. So approaching 30,000 now.
And do you know how many of those are active?
That research is going on at the moment, so we do annual surveys of the user base. So the next survey will be out very, very shortly. I don't have the numbers to hand, the recent numbers to hand, but of course a lot of students download it to play with it and to see how it works. A lot of journalists download it when they're curious. So not everyone that downloads the software actually is intending to use it. They're more curious about how it works, or they want to study it and maybe just use it for a week or two and then stop. An election monitoring project is a great example. You'd use it for 2 weeks and you'd stop.
Yeah. SMS is a very particular medium. It's stripped down to 160 characters. How does SMS as a medium work best?
Well, there's a lot of people that spend a lot of time trying to figure out how you maximise that 160 character space. And I think one of the misconceptions with mobile technology and SMS is that you can throw away all your existing communication channels, your newsletters, the newsletters and printed materials and so on, and just do everything through mobile. And that's not the case. Mobile can supplement existing communication channels very, very well. But you have to think very carefully about the message. It is very, very time constrained in terms of characters. So you need to be very clear about what it is you're trying to get the message to convey, whether you're seeking or soliciting a response or not. You need to think about how you word it. Many projects fail simply because the messaging hasn't been thought out. And I think that you need to try and experiment a lot. It really is a matter of trial and error. And there are some best practices out there for maximising 160 characters, but we're still learning this stuff. I think we have to realise that it's still quite a new area, absolutely.
The phone market is shifting. There will be increasingly large numbers of both smart and feature phones that can do more. How will Frontline SMS develop to respond to this changing market?
Well, it's a great question and something we get asked quite often, quite regularly, on the same number of times as we get asked what's going to happen when SMS disappears and no one uses it anymore. Volume of SMS goes up year on year, so we're not seeing any decrease in that. We have a data collection tool called Frontline Forms, which works on Java phones and allows you to do structured data collection through a user interface that we designed. That will be ultimately ported onto smartphones at some stage. But the data channel is still text message. I think smartphones are fantastic, but they're no good without a data connection.
Yeah.
In most cases, unless you have lots and lots of offline apps on there. So SMS is still very much the channel for us. But I think text messaging is going to stay relevant for a very, very long time. Smartphones also do SMS. And maybe potentially at some point in the future we'll be able to provide support for things like WhatsApp and iMessage, which are fundamentally text message type based services, which will cut costs, of course, for users. So it's exciting where it's going, but as you well know, in many African countries, it's still very, very early stages.
It's a work in progress.
For the smartphone, absolutely.
What's the business model for Frontline SMS? How do you fund yourself?
Well, up to the point that we did the management handover recently, it was donor funded. So I raised money from mostly US foundations who got quite attracted and liked what we were doing. I think it was that whole empowerment thing that they quite liked the sort of the sound of, and also the way that we pushed users' stories out through our website. So donor funding was the model from the very, very beginning, because of course the software is free and it's open source, so it's difficult to kind of sell it in that sense. There are some opportunities for income streams from the platform. Increasing numbers of larger users are asking for training and program design and help figuring out how to use text messaging and how to use mobile more broadly. So I think it's most likely going to be the sort of more typical open source model where the software remains free, but we make funds from providing services around that, because we of course are the experts in Frontline SMS.
And a hybrid between sort of donor funding and charged services in effect.
Absolutely, yeah. I think donor funding will still be part of our income stream, but hopefully not as much.